Alright, welcome everyone to another episode of Meta Musings. I'm ZeroCardinality here with Sotere. How are you doing today, Sotere?
Doing mighty fine, thank you. Solo keep keeping me down, but excited to talk about the meta.
Yep, so as always, we start with a short segment on unconventional supports, where we just talk about one unconventional support. And today, as you might guess from the picture that's already up there, we're going to talk about support Volibear. So,
Indeed, we always give it away.
yeah, so what do you think about support Volibear, Sotere?
I like it, and I don't want to brag, but I think I'm the one who did suggest it. but but I've actually seen it in high elo solo queue play, and the idea is he doesn't need that many items to do quite a bit of base damage. So certainly that is the concept behind any support. How much can they offer to your team in the laning phase and in team fights without giving them a massive amount of items? And in Volibear's case, he of course has very good base stats and very good regeneration. He has the fling from Rolling Thunder, which is a good amount of CC. Also has a slow, but mainly where his strength comes in is he can really bully people around in lane, especially if he's paired with another bruiser down there. And so that's kind of an unusual setup to have two bruisers bottom lane, but it's an unusual setup that's incredibly hard to deal with. For instance, like a Lee Sin or Volibear down bottom. But we generally
Well, it looks like we lost Sotere for a second there. I'll try to get that back up. But meanwhile, as Sotere was saying, is a good support, has that great lane presence. It could work with a bruiser like Lee Sin, but also works with regular AD carries because that Rolling Thunder you can use that Rolling Thunder, pop out from a bush and just catch up to someone, fling them back, and that is great CC. It makes the AD carry way out of position and can help your AD carry deal a lot of damage in the meanwhile. So a good choice for there. And 1 second, I'm trying to get Sotere back here, but having a little bit of trouble. Sorry about that. But yeah, so as he was saying, really, you want, for supports, you want champions that are good without items, and he has great base stats. So, 1 second, actually, it looks like we might be able to get Sotere back.
I have returned.
Sotere, you're back.
I am back.
Alright,
Oh
so...
man, I was like on a rant, and I think I was probably talking like 5 minutes after I was disconnected there. Oh my goodness.
So you were talking about Volibear?
I was talking about Volibear. I don't know what you've covered since, or
well,
how
I mean,
much.
I just kind of... I talked a little bit about Volibear. I was going to start talking about how Volibear could be useful with like supporty items, as opposed to the items that you might usually build on, say, a top lane Volibear or a jungle Volibear.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it certainly begged my point. I don't know exactly how much of what I talked about got through. I assume very little. But the idea behind Volibear is obviously, he can bring a lot to the team without having a lot of items underneath his belt, which is of course very, very important for a support champion who's not going to get very much gold over the course of time. And he plays kind of the same sort of blitzcrank role in lane, where he's not providing, a heal or sustain or a shield or any sort of attack damage bonuses and modifiers to his lane mate, but he's being a very frightening force, just kind of hanging around there, being scary, and making sure that the opposition doesn't go aggressive, because then they'll be afraid of getting flung by Rolling Thunder. And essentially Volibear at low levels is going to be stronger than most other supports, is the idea behind that. So it's kind of going into why he can be viable. Of course, his passive is great. for early game baiting. His Rolling Thunder is great to really engage on people, and then he just has base damage that is great all throughout the game. He of course has a slow with Majestic Roar, but Frenzy does really good damage. It's not very consistent damage, but it is good damage once he gets it procced. And then of course when he hits level 6, he adds a lot to team fights, or not to team fights, to really dueling fights as well as team fights. Because it gives 75, 115, 155, base damage, essentially damage for free for a good amount of time for the next 12 seconds. So that's why he can be considered in that role. And I was talking, probably while I was disconnected, about how he can be, yeah, sorry, while he can be in the traditional AD carry support role, but I've seen him more so, in the kind of a dual bruiser bottom lane. And I've seen it with Lee Sin work really well. I've seen it with Pantheon work really well. And of course, that's not the common meta, but we are about changing the meta. We do kind of like to stick to the usual with our unconventional supports because we want people to try them out in the usual way and not have to change the whole bottom lane. But he does really thrive in those 2v2s or those bruiser situations down bottom, because then you can really enforce your will on the opposition.
So one big concern about Volibear is that he is a melee champion, and we've discussed this before, and melee supports really don't do as well as range supports. So, can you talk a little bit about why, despite being melee, Volibear might be able to work?
Well, that's certainly going to be a downfall for him as it gets into later game, because, you would like to potentially, charge through the enemy team. If you were a top lane Volibear or a jungle Volibear, your goal, your aim is generally to charge through the back line, to fling the opponent with, Rolling Thunder, to, or the opponent being the AD carry or the AP carry, a very squishy target, and then stick on them and do damage with Frenzy over time and stick on them with Majestic Roar. Obviously, he's not going to be able to get into the back lines in most instances because he's not going to have the items to keep him alive to get back there. But what can he do instead? Well, he still has a pretty good slow. He's a 50% slow that lasts for 3 seconds, so fairly substantial. And he can use Rolling Thunder as a peel. In addition to that, he does more damage than a lot of other supports. So even if you're just in that kind of peeling role, you can really still be useful for your team, because if an opponent dives through to get to your AD carry and is really gung-ho about that, you can really chunk them down much more so than basically any other support could. Help protect them with Rolling Thunder, help slow down the opponent with Majestic Roar, and then just go to town, use Frenzy, use Thunderclaws, and just hope you win that 2v1 fast enough that you can get back into the main battle. And that's kind of how fights break down nowadays, is a lot of people, there'll be bruisers diving, and then there'll be the back line just hanging out, and I guess that's how all fights have always worked out. So it's really a race to see who can kill the bruiser faster, who can peel for the AD carry better, or alternatively, if the bruisers win that fight, which AD carry dies first. So even though he is at a disadvantage being melee range, I still think he has, the potential to do a good job of protecting the AD carry, and that's what it really comes down to late game.
Yep. And one other thing that's nice about Volibear is that he likes health, and as he has his passive that scales with health, and he has abilities. So basically, he just has abilities that scale with health. And supports have the supporting items are generally health items. So, like for example, Shirley's Reverie is a health item. Aegis of Legion is a health item, and everybody knows we love Aegis of Legion on this show.
Right.
So they help him stack health as well as getting these supporting items, and it's great for Volibear because he likes health a lot.
And yes, of course, that is good. There's also Heart of Gold, which builds into Locket or Randuin's, so even more health items just for him. I would caution people, even though you're getting health, even though you're going to be relatively tanky, you still probably cannot go into the back lines unless you've really shut down the opposition. If they've been farming appropriately, and you don't have tanky items, you should be killed very, very fast. And I would not rely over much on your passive, as it takes a while to heal back up. But that being said, I mean, if you do draw a significant amount of fire, then maybe you've done your job in the team fight, whether you get away or you die. If you do get them to focus you for a while, I mean, that might just be enough for the rest of your team to do enough damage to kill everyone. So, all things to consider. But do you have anything else you wanted to add about Volibear, Zero?
Not really. I mean, he might draw an ignite because people, really don't want to deal with that passive, and that's really taking an ignite off of one of your carries and just putting it on the support, or even one of the tanks. So, for example, if you also have a Mundo on your team, they might. I mean, they have to choose between igniting him or igniting you, and I mean, most of the time they're probably going to ignite the Mundo, but maybe they'll waste the ignite sometime and it'll be on cooldown, so they don't have it to ignite somebody else. So, I mean, just basically you're able to draw some fire with your tankiness as well.
Okay, I have to say something. I mean, yeah, that's a very good point. And yeah, if the Volibear does get ignited, that's a really great thing. The thing about Mundo and people being like, oh, I'm just going to ignite Mundo. Well, that's great for the people who are igniting Mundo, but ignite on tankier champions like Volibear and like Mundo that's not a good idea. That's not like a really great strategy. Now it does, cut down on their healing effects, but they're still going to be healing, so that means, they're less likely to die from said ignite. And why would you ignite someone who has, why would you do like 300, 350 or whatever true damage to someone who has 3,500 health when you could do it to someone who has 1,800 health, which is the traditional AP carry, AD carry. So, I mean, it's essentially half as effective in taking down their total life pool. That's always been my experience. That's always been my, my thought on the matter. Obviously, everyone does it. Pros do it. They ignite the Mundo, the jungler, the tanks. And, sometimes it's just all about trying to kill whoever you can as fast as humanly possible, in which case that's a good idea. But, in general, if you have a choice of who to ignite, tanks, a Volibear, and a Mundo, for instance, should be kind of the last people you ignite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, I mean, basically those are your, that's your support Volibear in a nutshell. And it can be really fun to try out. It's kind of like, as you said, kind of like a Blitzcrank, where you can really terrorize the enemy lane just by popping out of the bush. So now that we're done with that, let's move on to the main portion of our show. And this is really where I think Sotere came up with this idea. I'm not sure if you did it with like others, or I mean, I heard it first from you.
Well, if I came up with anyone, it was you. So
okay, so I mean, I was okay.
Yeah, we'll call it a collaborative effort between us,
right.
because I didn't. I'm pretty sure I didn't hear about it from anyone else. I was just like, we were talking about random things, and I was like, oh, this is a good composition. It actually came to me. Well, I don't know if it came to me via this way, but one of the more interesting things, one of the more innovative things I've ever seen in competitive League of Legends play was Dignitas running support Gangplank. And, in itself, support Gangplank is fine, but what was really great about what they did is they ran support Gangplank with a Caitlyn who could, farm safely down bottom, with a Katarina, with a Jax top, and I forget who their jungler was, but essentially their entire team could really scale from his, attack damage buff with that raised morale. So I was thinking, there's a lot of synergies to be had with teams that professionals overlook. And, sometimes they're not really the most viable strategies, but how can we really look at, making a team, synergize appropriately? Because so far, I mean, people just are like, okay, well, let's have a global team. Oh, let's have an AoE, ultimate team. Oh, let's have a burst assassin team. But beyond that, they don't really look into the skills and what everyone has to offer each other. And that's kind of how we came up with this idea. And Zero, I'll leave it to you to inform the masses.
Inform the masses, yes. This team is what we call the attack speed team, where you have champions that are good at increasing attack speed. So you would have AP Ezreal mid with his Essence Flux that increases attack speed of allies. You would have support Nunu, of course, the standard attack speed increasing support. You would have Sivir as the AD carry, who has the ultimate to increase attack speed and movement speed. You would have We had several options for this. We could have a Nidalee top with her heal that also increases attack speed, or we could have a Jarvan with his Demacian standard, and Warwick also for the either top or in the jungle with his Hunter's Call that increases attack speed. And the idea behind this is you really want to stack that attack speed so when you, as the AD carry, as the Savior goes for the IE Rush, which is pretty standard on AD carries, people like going for that Infinity Edge first because it's such a strong item. After you get there, the next item people build is Phantom Dancer. But if you have all these champions on your team that can increase your attack speed by so much, you really don't need that attack speed, so you can go straight for, say, a Bloodthirster and really build damage. And you can get really strong just by getting all of these stats from your allies, getting all of this attack speed, and having all of this damage from your items as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's the basic gist of how the team comp would work. Basically, just stacking attack speed with champion abilities and getting the damage from items.
Right, and we did the math before the show. Do you want to share that with everyone? I'll go over the basics, and you can go over the final tally, because I'm not sure we actually have that right, and if we're going to say something wrong, let it be on you.
Well, I mean, I won't give exact numbers, mostly because we found that if you go with, a Nidalee top, Warwick jungle, Ezreal mid, Sivir as the AD carry, and Nunu as the support, and you have everybody use their abilities at the same time, you would have, without any like attack speed items, you would have Sivir go over the 2.5 threshold. So Sivir would have 2.5 attack speed. I think we double checked our work once or something, but we might have to check it again. But basically, you would get all the attack speed you would want with this team if they actually use all their abilities together. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot of attack speed. I mean, you can also put Jarvan up there. He gives a little bit less attack speed, but he might be preferable to Nidalee top, depending on matchups and stuff like that.
I mean, yeah, that's tough to say because, I mean, Nidalee, whether she's AP or AD, can win most every lane. She's pretty standard up top. Jarvan, too, but he's kind of fallen out of favor more recently. Yeah, essentially it's an extra 265 attack speed. So that is pretty crazy. But why would this be so great? Obviously, it's a kind of a neat idea, of course, to stack all this attack speed. But really, is it going to help your AD carry that much to kind of influence your team this way? And at first glance, perhaps not. If you don't like the idea of AP Ezreal, especially, then maybe you don't want to go for this. You also have to keep in mind, Sevir's ultimate isn't going to be, always off cooldown. Hunter's Call from Warwick is going to have, a period where it's not always up. But other skills, like essentially Ezreal's Essence Flux is up most of the time. Nunu's Blood Boil up all the time. So they, and Nidalee with a little bit of cooldown reduction will also have Primal Surge up essentially 100% of the time too. So, provided you keep all of those buffs on your AD carry, it is going to make them so incredibly strong in that mid game, and especially and into late game, and it can really help them modify their build, going Infinity Edge into perhaps a Bloodthirster, or getting an early Last Whisper if they're building armor, the opposition that is, or even going defensive items, because they're going to have so much offensive firepower just through the use of all these skills. And a lot of people a lot of people don't like Nunu in the jungle, and didn't like him until his rework. And a lot of people are liking him a little bit more now, which certainly makes sense because he was buffed. But what people always overlooked is he's granting a 65% attack speed, 15% movement speed to your AD carry. So it's essentially giving them more than an extra Phantom Dancer in attack speed, for that late game, which makes them incredibly strong. So I like that thought, and I like the potential of being able to go Infinity Edge into Bloodthirster, Infinity Edge into Last Whisper, and Infinity Edge into Guardian Angel, and not necessarily need that early that early Phantom Dancer or that early attack speed, or any attack speed for that matter. As we mentioned, you can almost hit the cap just with this lineup.
Yep, and one thing is that people buy Phantom Dancer. I mean, attack speed is the main stat, but it's not the only stat. It also has critical hit rate, and it has movement speed. So I mean, we got the attack speed covered. You don't really need the attack speed with all these attack speed boosts on your team. And the movement speed is basically covered because, I mean, Nunu's going to be increasing your movement speed as well, and your Sevire's ultimate also increases movement speed. So, I mean, you're going to get that movement speed still with this team. The thing that you're really going to be missing, though, is the critical strike chance. And after you get the Infinity Edge, you really like the critical strike chance because the critical strikes do more damage. So that is why we also considered another item to build instead of going, for example, Infinity Edge to Bloodthirst or Infinity Edge to Last Whisper. And that is this item that I'm going to put up because, not that, sorry.
No.
This item, if you guys recognize
Oh.
it. And that is an Executioner's Calling. Now, Sotere, can you talk about why we like the Executioner's Calling, or why we might want to build an Executioner's Calling?
I can probably do that. Well, I mean, the one thing about the Executioner's Calling is it's an item that has had very little use over the course of its, history, and it's received some buffs, but what it hasn't received, especially lately, is nerfs. And that's important because Vampiric Scepters, Lifesteal through Doran's Blades essentially got nerfed across the board, including Bloodthirster. But what didn't get nerfed is this item right here because it hasn't been used very much, and I've been seeing it pick up a little bit more play. And it's always been great if you're going against a Mundo or a Swain or people who really rely on regeneration over the course of team fights or battles or whatnot. And even in lane, it's a very effective tool. But what it in particular brings to the table for our lineup as we have it now is you really need that critical strike, you need that lifesteal, and you need that in kind of an initial item if you're going to run attack speed, but you're also picking up that early Infinity Edge. Then what you're really missing out on is critical strike, and this gives you a gold efficient way of picking up two very important statistics with the critical strike and the lifesteal to provide you sustain, and it also has a little extra added bonus as well through its active.
Yep, and I mean it does have a small passive which adds a little bit of magic damage, but I mean, really it's basically inconsequential. People really don't care too much about that. I mean the important stats are the critical strike and the lifesteal, and it gives a lot of lifesteal. I think it's 18% lifesteal, which is a lot. I mean you're not going to get that much. You're going to need, basically, if you have a Bloodthirst, you're going to need to have it, I think, like 4/5 stacked in order to get that much lifesteal. So, I mean, it's a great item, and it is very cost efficient. So, it works well. The only thing is, it does not have any attack damage with it. So and as well, it does not build into any items. So basically, you are investing in an item that is not going to build into anything else, and that has no attack damage, which you might not want. So, I mean, it is a trade-off, but it is an interesting item to consider, especially if you're going to be getting your attack speed from somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, there are drawbacks to it, of course, but just like looking at the gold, the overall cost for it is $13.50. So I mean, it's pretty expensive for kind of an initial item pickup, but it's essentially giving you like 180% of a Vampiric Scepter and a good chunk more of a it's almost like doubling both of the Brawler's gloves rather, the critical strike from them, and the almost doubling the lifesteal from the Vampiric Scepter. So really, it is, as we mentioned, very cost efficient. It is very focused on those two things. The only time the passive really comes into play, I mean, it does give you a little bit of damage, but the other interesting thing about the passive is, especially if you're going against like a Malphite, and I believe there's a couple other champions who kind of, don't want to get hit for a while so they can recharge their shield. Well, it'll, put on a little bit of a dot, does 4 magic damage per second for 8 seconds. So if you hit them, you hit them once, then suddenly for the next 8 seconds, they're not even, starting to recharge their shield. So it's kind of an interesting tool. It can be, used in, matchups just for that purpose as well. Not to mention, how effective the active is if you're going against a Vladimir, a Swain, a Mundo, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so, I mean, it does have its pluses. I mean, you're not going to use that passive much, but I mean, it does have its uses sometimes. But yeah, it's just another item to consider. And I mean, I think we really just want to find a use for this Executioner's Calling because I mean, we like having all that lifesteal and all that critical strike, but I mean, there are these shortcomings. It doesn't have attack damage, it doesn't build into anything else, and it's really an early game oriented item. So really, for AD carries, you want to build towards a late game, so it's really not considered much in the current meta because AD carries generally try to, besides going for maybe some Doran's Blades early on to help them get those bigger items later, or the Wriggle's Lantern, they really kind of skip over stuff like the Executioner's Calling because, I mean, the Wriggle's Lantern, for example, might give you the ability to farm better, and it gives you armor and lifesteal to help with trades, while Executioner's Calling is, I mean, it gives you critical strike, but that's after you build your Infinity Edge, and so, I mean, after that point, you're really trying to build up items instead of, you know, getting stuff like getting these mid-game items. So it's really in an interesting place right now, so it's very, it's not used very much, but Sotere and I believe that it does have it can have its uses, and it can actually work well in certain team comps.
Absolutely, and I think we will see it a little bit more. I know the Rayman's picking it up on his Teemo. I've seen a couple other high elo people, you know, picking it up on their AD carries. So hopefully we'll see it more. And that, you know, every time we see something new, it makes us happy. It makes the meta gods happy. Actually, I'm not sure if it makes them happy or sad. Not entirely sure on that, but I think it makes them happy. So certainly, you know, something that
I think it depends on what we want to do. If we want to run something completely wacky, then it probably makes them sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because this item isn't that wacky. Although I did hear, you know, I was playing a game today, and my Tristana built it on our team, and one of my teammates was like, "Oh my goodness, GG, Tristana built an Executioner's Calling." It did so happen that we had a really big lead and we lost it, but it wasn't because of the item. It's kind of interesting to pick it up on a Tristana because she has, you know, explosive shots, which also give a healing debuff. But the active range on Executioner Calling is very, very good. Actually, forget what the exact range is. I want to say it's like 900 or something ridiculous like that, but I don't have it right in front of me. So there's reasons even to get it on a Tristana, although I wouldn't suggest it there.
Well, Tristana also has the attack speed boost from her Q. So, I mean, if you want to just go Infinity Edge into a second item, you might want to get an Executioner's Calling relying on just your Q for the attack speed boost. So you get the critical strike and you get the lifesteal from this Executioner's Calling. So, I mean, that might be why. I mean, it has a myriad of stats which don't quite always work well together. I mean, in an ideal item, you would want all the stats to work well, and I mean, it has that little bit of magic damage, it has that active, and a lot of times that's not, you don't want all of these things in this Executioner's Calling, but there are situations where you might want where you might want them. So I mean, it's a situational item certainly, but it's not a completely wacky and troll build item at all.
Mm-hmm. It certainly is not. Our attack speed team, I don't think it's a troll team either, but you know, we haven't seen it in professional play. You know, it's a possibility that we will see it one of these days. Maybe someone will pull it out. And you know, we mentioned, you know, the full, you know, the entire lineup, the 5-man attack speed team. But you don't necessarily need to do that. I mean, you could just, you know, take in a couple of parts of that, but just recognize everything that you're, you know, potentially giving to your team synergy. How great it can be, I guess, is the point in there. Because if you have a Warwick and you have a Nunu and or Ezreal, Sever, Nidalee, Jarvan, just recognize what they are bringing into the team, because it's, you know, it's pretty impressive. That extra attack speed for an AD carry who's kind of the most important, you know, champion on your team, playing the most important role as you get into the really late game phase, is going to be so much stronger. So certainly something to consider.
Yep, definitely. So that is our little advertisement, I guess, of our attack speed comp. Thanks for watching Musings. Sorry about the short little I guess we had a couple of technical difficulties in this show, with Sotere kind of timing out a little bit and talking to himself for a while.
Oh my goodness, yeah, my apologies. It's so ridiculous because I've had the internet people out over the last couple of days, but it's still not enough. Not enough. It's still having these tiny, tiny little issues. It only disconnects me for like a minute, but obviously when it's at the start of a show or in a game, it's very drastic. Anyways, enough of my woes. Everyone, thank you for tuning in, and we'll have something new and exciting for you next week as well.
Yep. Thanks for listening. Have a good night, everyone.
All right. And now to see how long it is before you turn off the recording. The waiting game every time.
Well,
every time.
I don't know how this delay works.
I don't know either. I'm watching Blaze vs TSM in the background. It's mildly entertaining. Blaze is very aggressive. I like it.